there's any opportunity in, you might get a chance to have questions. If not, just use the hour. I'm going to give every candidate an hour, so we're starting at about 50 up here, and I'll blend it there if we're getting at that time. Let's start over here with Wayne. Wayne, we can pass the mic. All the questions will come randomly, so just kind of watch for that. Okay.
Good morning, Doctor. I'm Wayne Clark. I'm the Assistant Police Chief with the Duval County School Police Department.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning, Doctor. My name is Brenda Ford. I work with Newtown Success Zone, AmeriCorps LISP, as a support coach.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Spence, and I am a member of Duval County Schools and been in the educational technology business for about 18 years.
Okay. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jay King. I'm a school advisory council chair for middle school. I have two daughters in Duval County, and I have a wife who teaches first grade.
Okay. Good morning.
My name is Patty Miracle. I've had three children come through the Duval County Schools, and I'm also a kindergarten teacher for 16 years.
Good morning.
Good morning, Felita Tutt, Duval County Council PTA President.
Good morning.
Good morning, Narcisse. My name is Julia Menifee. I'm a CRT data entry clerk at Rutledge Pearson Elementary School.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. My name is Derek Doe. I do data entry at Chapin Trail Elementary.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Jenny Bird, representing Board Member Scott Shine. I'm a retired Miami-Dade County Public Schools administrator.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Halligan, and I am a chronic volunteer in Duval County. And I have
that's a good thing, no?
Right. I have 4 children that are in Duval County schools from elementary up to graduating senior.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Tara Harold Jackson, educator at Robert E. Lee High School and SAC chair at Fort Caroline Middle School.
Okay. Good morning. And Terry actually gets to ask the first question, but Terry, can you include in there, give us a little bit about your background? Just say that because I think that will make it more natural. I don't know if you were in the room when I said that.
Oh, well now.
You didn't do your research on me enough yet?
Oh, trust me. I think by looking at me, you already know the answer. Well, no, I am a product of Duval County Public's private and public school.
Okay.
I also was one of the first family liaisons with the full service schools.
Okay.
I have served in the district as case management with contractors, and I also serve as like project pilot for our particular transition programs here as the educator.
Okay.
And I now currently have piloted the all-girls leadership class at Robert E. Lee High School.
Oh, nice.
So I've been a part of this district in many various, in all working with our high-risk children. And our gains and graduation rate with the programs that I have worked and piloted has been remarkable.
Nice.
So I sit as education and parent and community as well, but mostly I'm educational driven.
So Terry,
So you ready?
I wanted you to ask him to give us that.
Okay.
I was gonna, you should hire her. But Terry did a great job. I think you're.
Thank you. Okay, let's start this off, Dr. Narcisse. Please describe why you have chosen and included the Duval County Public School District in your career plans. What aspects of our school district and our region have attracted you and brought you here today?
Yeah, so I believe I have the right skill sets to do this job. I'll tell you a little bit about myself because I know you probably looked at the resume, made your calls. So I think it's better to tell you about who I am. Before I start, always important, I couldn't do this work without the support of my lovely wife, Dr. Maritza Gonzalez is over there. Maritza, just raise your hand. She's also been in education. As you know, this job is tough and you have to have great family support to kind of move the work. So let me tell you a little bit about myself outside what you see on the papers. So I'm the son of Haitian immigrants. I grew up as an English language learner. I tell folks just because I speak proper English now and wear a suit and all that, I was your typical young male growing up in New York. Mom and dad came to this country for a better life. I was born here, but I spoke Creole and French at home. And I probably on some days had my braids in my hair with baggy jeans and Timberland boots. And although I'm not a fraternity guy, I was impacted by 2 fraternities, Omega Psi Phi and Alpha Phi Alpha, who had these boys programs that were helping young Black males. And I was fortunate enough to be around that. My father believed, because my dad was a taxi driver, my dad believed you have to be around, you have to see yourself consistently to become something. And that was kind of his belief system with my mom. And my mom probably got her English better when I started bringing my homework home, and she started figuring I was manipulating her and saying, no, Ma, no homework, or no, they only want to do one question, not two questions. Unfortunately for my brother, when he was born and came around, her English was superb. And so she was able to kind of make sure we all did our homework. So as I went through that, I've been in a majority of my experiences in urban education. I tell folks I feel there is a difference in urban education because of a lot of the intensities and political challenges, especially when you work in large, complex school systems. I have been a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal both in Pittsburgh and in Boston Public Schools. In the Pittsburgh public school system, I opened up a school, and the Boston public schools, I led a turnaround effort at a school. And I tell people they were all lessons learned. One day I can share with you what they are. I've also worked in Montgomery County Public Schools, a district in Maryland that has 160,000 students, as a director of school performance there, where I've supervised principals and worked for different school improvement areas. I've also been an associate superintendent of Prince George's County Schools, which is another urban district with 130,000 students, where I was over all the high schools, priority elementaries and middles. There are about 78 schools. There's 211 schools there. Both had large budgets of $2.2 billion and $2.4 billion. And now I am currently the #2 in charge in Nashville, Tennessee, where there are 169 schools and 88,000 students. I am in charge of all 169 schools and 88,000 students, where I work with the team around taking care of the day-to-day operations of those schools. I tell people, as my superintendent says, I live in two worlds as the #2 guy. I help move the system, and then I help him with politics. As you can imagine, in this job, you have everybody tugging at you all the time. Everybody is skeptical. Everybody, depending on the type of experience they've had, they either trust the system or not, and you serve multiple communities. And the reason I say I'm a little biased to urban education is because that context is the same for every urban city, and Duval County Public Schools is urban. And when we talk about urban, I don't mean just like a city. I talk about like complexity. So, serving an urban core, a suburban, and a rural core. Nashville is very similar in that context to Duval County. And so I would say to you that I believe I bring a certain set of skill sets around that work. I've been exposed to doing a lot of things and working through a lot of complex issues, and more importantly, building coalitions of people to move the work together and trying to make sure that we can help support teachers, principals, parents, and communities to move that work, and trying to make sure that people invest in the right way for long-term longevity support.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
What types of decisions or responsibilities do you delegate to others to include employees or outsourcing? And how do you monitor or manage accountability for performance of those who are responsible?
Yeah, so what I tell folks is I may be the superintendent, but I don't make decisions in isolation. I tell folks it takes a team to move the work. And it's not about the superintendent. It's about Duval County Public Schools as a community. The beautiful thing you get with me as being the superintendent is I've learned lessons. And one thing you learn in these jobs is that you don't know everything, and you have to constantly get feedback, and you have to listen a lot. And as you're listening, you're trying to move the work and build coalitions within communities. What makes this job complex and large and complex with urban districts is that you have multiple communities that are a part of this city. And the reality is you cannot have one community over the other. Everyone has to feel the buy-in of the city. And that goes whether it's through race, class, whether you're have or have not. This is Duval County Public Schools, and we are here to build the work together. So in 10 years from now and 20 years from now, we are the IT city with our children leading and becoming the next superintendents, teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, and those pieces. I think that it's important that that context is clear. So when I work with folks, I'm a problem solver. I try to work with you. I think culture is important. Cultures can slow school districts down. In systems like ours, even though we have intensity and we have to move things, I say we keep the main thing the main thing. We focus on our priorities, and we help to build capacity, and everybody in the city should know what direction we're moving in, because you have to, in complexities of cities and urban worlds, be transparent. And everyone should know within the next 3 to 5 years where we're going, how we're spending our funds, and what the district's markers are for priority around the work.
Could you please give us an example of how you developed a shared vision of a preferred outcome with the board and various stakeholders, how you've implemented it, what the outcomes were, and would you do anything different based on those experiences in Duval County?
Yeah, so, I tell you, I got an answer for that every day doing this job. I gave the same example to the last group. So I'll give you 2 extreme examples, because I think it's important that you hear what's worked and what I would say was a lesson learned, because nothing's been done perfect, but there was lessons learned that helped us to figure out what are ways to do a better job with engaging with the community around things. First of all, you can't make people feel like you're doing things to them. They have to feel like they're a part of it. It takes a village to raise the children and the families and the communities. And so I'm going to give you the good example, and then I'll go into the complex one. So the good example was we had to close 2 schools this year. And Duval County, probably like every other school, when you're closing a school, you can imagine if there's history and all these components, people don't like to close schools. And we had to do that because the reality is we had schools that were under-enrolled, and they were costing the district millions of dollars. So we decided that we would just start on the small scale and do 2. And we did such a set of work as a team. And I'm always going to keep telling you that, because I tell folks, maybe if I'm your choice as superintendent, it takes a team of people to do this. Our running joke usually is I just get paid to get beat up on in the papers, but it takes usually a team to move the work. When we ended up working through those communities constantly to engage them and preparing them for the school closure so they can know where their kids were going to go the following year. And one of the things that we learned was particular communities communicate in particular ways. Some communities do it by social media. Some communities just do the faith base. Some communities have community-based organizations that play a heavy part in how they do things. And so in our process, as we were going through that, because we had a very short timeline, we were able to engage multiple set of stakeholders that impacted those 2 communities to close those 2 schools. And what we actually did was actually merge them. I don't want to say close, but merge. And then we had to merge the staff, the principals. We had to let one principal go get another job. And that was a lot of heavy lifting. And because we did so much work in the front end, that the teachers, the principals, the community was able to embrace the change. If I probably said we had to do something like that, long term, the lesson learned is if you have to do something like that, I would tell people you have to plan 1.5 years out before you do something like that. But I would call it a success because there wasn't an uprising in the community. The families were okay with it. They were happy that they felt that they know that their kids were going to be safe. They were going to get the same set of education. They felt good about the choice of the leader. I'm a big believer that communities should help choose principals, not districts. I think we work with them on helping to choose a principal, but we shouldn't be saying, hey guys, here's who's your next principal. I think it's important for a community to have buy-in in that. And so that was a success, I would call, because of how the community responded. And when I call things success, I call things success not based on what I think, but how I see the response of the community, the family, the parents, and the teachers and all that. And when I talk about community, I tell folks, everyone's a part of the community. Whoever is engaged with that community is a part of them, whether it's the paraprofessional, the teacher, the assistant, whatever your context is, the parents and those things. It's a community approach on doing that work. So that would be what I would call a success. Now, let's talk about complex issue. The latest complex issue that we did in Nashville is our Title I funding. Currently in Nashville, we give all schools money for Title I, or at least if you're 50%. Based on the federal guidelines of Title I, it should be for your most neediest children. In our data, we had about 49 to 50 schools that have 100% poverty. But we were distributing the money in a way where whether you're 100% or whether you're 50%, you're getting the same amount of funds. Now you can imagine sitting in my seat that looks very inequitable, right? But the reality is the community, that's how they've been doing it. And there's no right or wrong around things. It's just how things are rolled out. It's been a part of the history. And so one of the things that we did was we said that we went, talked, connected with the board, connected with the cabinet and different folks. And we said that unless you are 75% or poorer, you are going to get Title I funding. And you can imagine if schools that were below 75%, who used their Title I's for a lot of different things, were upset. And it turned into communities pitting against each other. That got racial at times. You're giving to the blacks versus the whites and all those pieces. And so we went back and we had conversations with the board, and the board, to their credit, was really trying to help us kind of think through some of the challenges. Because one thing I tell folks is when you make change, a lesson I learned is if the people are not embracing that change or don't see that change long-term, then it doesn't matter whether you think it's right or wrong, you're going to have a long-term challenge. So you have to kind of think through how do you slowly scale to do that. So we decided to take the Title I funding back and not do the 75%. And we said that in 3 years, we will get it to 75%. Because the reality is your lowest socioeconomic schools have a correlation with poor performance. And that's a reality in all urban districts. It's not unique to one community. And the more resources you have, the more you can provide additional dollars for support. And so that was, in my opinion, a very complex issue, because the goal was not to get people to feel like they didn't have a buy-in, but the reality was to get the community to move forward. And so our lesson learned was how do you scale that? And then also how do we make sure that we listen to the communities much, much more about what they valued so they don't feel like they had a loss. When you do one thing for one person to somebody else, people feel there's a loss. And when someone feels there's a loss, that's when you get tension. And then they cannot buy into that part of the work. So that's the other example. And so I would argue that it's complex. It wasn't very successful, but the lessons learned is you have to keep engaging.
Thank you, Doctor. My question is, what has been the most difficult decision you had to make with a governing board? And what was your role, the role of the board, and how did you handle the reactions of this decision?
So I'm the number 2 guy, so I watch the number 1 make decisions, and then I get to go back and say, I don't know if I'd have did that or I would have done that. So it's a luxury position to have, but as a team, it's tough sometimes because you have to move the work as a team. Because as most good superintendents, they listen and they work with teams to help move the system. So my role has always been, when I work with the board, has been to kind of help them in their committees around whether it's budget or any of the committees that they have to focus on their work to kind of move the work. An example could be the same that I gave around the Title I funds. We went through the board to do that and kind of working through the complexities with them. Board members are representations of communities, and they're the voted officials that are in those seats, and you have to kind of work through with them to get information to make sure that their representation of their communities feel like they're being responsive in the work. And so one of the pieces that I did was I was the guy in the background working with the superintendent to engage, to make sure that they had questions that are answered, where they anticipate there may be some fallout in their communities, how they can help them either message certain things. So that was kind of my big role around that, and working through that particular process. Most of my job is usually, we call it kind of shepherding legislation through Congress in a way, as you kind of work through with boards on getting through particular issues. And, I tell folks, the board, to be a board member is a hard job, because you're working, when you are a board member, you're not only thinking about your own community, but you think about the community as a collective. And so those are kind of the two spaces that you're always working in. And you're trying to make sure that you're also making equitable decisions, because you're also being judged with the superintendent around particular decisions. And so my role all the time has been kind of working through those particulars. I can give you multiple sets of issues, but my role has always been trying to answer questions, work through particular issues, go out to communities and talk to communities to be able to say, give the explanation. I've learned a lot in this job that you have to give people the why and make sure that they understand and they can see where does it connect for them. If people don't see that, it becomes a challenge and it's hard to move. One of the hardest things I've learned is, even if you may think it's right for a community, if the community does not buy in and does not feel it's appropriate for them, it's a hard shift for you to still do it, because it doesn't have sustainability. That's why I tell folks it's important to plan out, not be reactionary. Plan out 3 years on how you do a budget. Plan out 3 to 5 years on how do you align priorities to the strategic plan. We shouldn't have our own community guessing about where the schools are going to be, what we're going to invest in, what we think quality is, how we think about all kids. Doesn't matter what color you are, what neighborhood you live in, whether you're in the beaches or in Arlington or in Northeast, whatever the context is, people have to feel that. You're in a job already that if they've had bad experiences, collectively they're going to come to that table with those experiences thinking that may be the same. So you have to work through that and kind of build through that process. So you listen a lot to move that work.
So my question is around funding. What role or have you experienced in state legislation and working on getting more funding for schools, and also battling some of those unfunded mandates?
Yeah, so I have not been at the legislature. I have been on the cabinets of working through with the person who goes up to the legislator on the strategy. And I've also been a part of most urban districts in every state have what we call an organization where the large urban districts always get together to go to the legislature to argue like what's important for the district. So I've been a part of those conversations, and then we work through those attorneys that go there. And also I've been a part of working with, we always have every place I have been has a government relations person that goes up there, because we have to have our voices heard around what our work is and what we actually need to do. Urban districts are usually underfunded. We have tremendous amount of issues. And I tell people Tennessee is the sister of Florida, because whatever Florida does first, Tennessee does second, and vice versa. And there's always, the legislator always has state mandates that they put on you. So they may say to you, for example, we're going to give you all this money for this. What you don't see is there's already state requirements around how you have to spend the budget. And so then you get in this quagmire of trying to problem solve with that funding and getting your community to understand that, so you can kind of implement and move some of the work. I have been heavily involved in budget. As a matter of fact, just to get some rest before I got here, I've had to deal with, we made our budget in Nashville is $890 million. We had to make a request for $44 million, and we now have to make, the mayor only gave us $5 million, and we have to make $17 million cut. And so I know here in Duval, we're in a process like that, but that is not new to urban districts. In every one of the districts I have been in, they make cuts. And I tell people, if you believe that the government will be funding you fully all the time, it is not true. There's not enough money to go around. And so you have to be strategic on working with partners, your business communities and philanthropies and foundations to bring in extra resources. And you also, one big challenge is make sure that people see resources as how you partner strategically with around particular initiatives. It's not always a money thing. That's another way of looking at money because they have to give people time and energy to go work with you. But an example I would say is if you're going to work in the arts and you partner with foundations that are doing the arts, and how do you help them to think about resources to help with that particular school versus where you say, I need X amount of $1 million for this. And the last part I would tell folks is there has to be clarity around what we call return on investment. You can't just keep spending to spend. It's important that you shouldn't go back to groups every year asking for money. You should be able to, let me frame it this way. High functioning districts say, in 5 years, we want to have this much investment. And they work through with your business partners and philanthropists to say, okay, this is how much you should have investment. So in 5 years from now, this is going to happen, because most of those folks have boards that they respond to as well. And so you have to be kind of strategic around that. So the beautiful thing right now, I think this is a golden moment for Duval County Public Schools. Right now, we are in our 4th year of the strategic plan, which means you have 1 more year left. And that means we should be planning for the new year. And you got a new superintendent coming in. So this is a great opportunity to kind of begin to look at the entire system and to begin to mark what are your next couple of goals for the next 5 years. So as you transition in, you're planning the platform for the next strategic plan. So the board and the community can kind of move that work forward. And so I think that's a great time. It's always tough when you come in year 2 or 3, because you have to kind of assess where they are with certain initiatives and those pieces. So you still assess, you still look at what has been done well and what has been challenging, but you're now a part of the process where you can build together.
I actually have this next question too on her behalf. She had to step away. You pretty much touched on this already when you talked about ROI and fiscal responsibility, but our question was around, of course, being fiscally responsible and how you communicate that out to the community and the board. What are your views on that?
Yeah, so I gave the other group I thought yesterday when I was meeting one-on-one with the board members, one of the board members said to me, I thought it was comical, I ask a lot of questions. I was like, that's good. I'd rather you ask me 50 million questions and stay quiet. When you don't hear from people, that's when you get concerned, you know? I tell people, you know, it's interesting when you work in urban districts, you know, we pay a lot of attention to the loudest voice, but the reality is you have to get to the voices that you don't hear. And I think the more people ask questions, the more they share their hopes and dreams for the community, the better you can design a plan together to support the work. I mean, this is not about Cito Narcisse as the superintendent of Duval County Public Schools. This is about us as a community building to make sure the next generation of our kids can lead Jacksonville to be the it city. That's what it's about. So I tell folks you have to think, for us, it's thinking bigger in terms of that type of investment in our children. I want to make sure I answered your question. So you asked about communications, right? Lesson learned. I wrote my dissertation on school community partnerships. And like most educators, you know, you're in the thick of things and you're working through stuff. And here's some things or realities of America that I learned, because I've worked in a lot of places. Communities communicate in a lot of different ways. Fact. Doesn't matter whether it's their socioeconomic, doesn't matter about their race, doesn't matter about a lot of different things. But when people live in particular communities, they're part of particular communities, communication happens in a lot of different ways. And school districts have to be able to know what that way is, so they are constantly communicating. It's not good to do things to a community. You have to do it with the community for long-term sustainability. And when people ask me what I think success is, I tell people success is not what we put as markers on the paper around the student performance. Success is knowing that the community felt good around how we achieve those success markers. And when they see that mark of success, they themselves can talk like the superintendent and say, you know something, this is what's going on in our district. This is how we're doing things. This is how my child is doing X, Y, and Z. This is how we communicate. And no one feels in the group disenfranchised around that. And it doesn't matter whether you're a have or have not. Doesn't matter you're Black, white, Latino, English language learner, whatever that conversation is. It's that we all in this particular county are clear about how we move that work together and how we communicate. Some communities love social media more than others, or have access more than others. Some communities like forums. Some communities like, I mean, there's just a wide range of things you can go through, but you have to communicate a lot to folks. And I tell folks, we have to do it so much to the point where they can tell you the plan. One of the things I do is I walk around and I listen a lot. And listening, I'm always looking forward to hearing whether people are repeating the same thing, or whether they understand the same thing in the different communities. And that tells me whether our communication is happening or not. Another thing I do with our team is we create policies at the school level, and I go visit schools a lot. And I go to see schools, and I don't make a lot of comment, just to see that if the policy that was created, is it causing a hot mess in the school, or is it working? And you also listen, and you try to listen to teacher voices, principal voices, and folks to see how they're interpreting about that, so you can make changes, so you can kind of move and support that work. And it's more complex the more people you have, because we're about 11,000 plus. In Nashville, it's no different. We're about 11,000 plus as well. And that complexity happens a lot.
We're approaching question 7, and we're approaching halfway. So the pace is just 2 minutes behind.
Feels like the NCAA finals.
Okay. What has been the most unpopular decision you have had to make, and how did you handle the reaction to this decision?
Yeah, so I gave you the title 1. That was very interesting. So it depends. So I've been fortunate because I've worked in all levels, right? On how, being a teacher, and I went through the ranks. I'm a traditional person, went through the ranks to be where I am. So I was part of the principal movement when they did turnaround schools in Boston. I think that's been, that experience has been the one thing that's really got on my mind a lot, because, I was young. I went from Pittsburgh opening a school to going to turnaround a school. I was in my 20s, had my doctorate, and there was some things that as I was going through the process, I learned, because around how you engage faculty, how you engage the community to move the work. And although we were able to get some performances that were good, it left a lot of a poor taste in people's mouth about how we went about it. And I tell folks, when we learn a lot about the lessons when Secretary Duncan gave the turnaround schools, cities like, I think Delaware was the first state, but cities like Boston, Chicago, LA, we were the ones that implemented it. And we did it at a rate of speed that I would argue was just too fast. And I've learned that you can't do things fast. You got to take your time. One big thing I tell people: 1 goal is a goal, 2 goals is half a goal, 3 goals is no goals at all. And it's about quality. And when you do things too much, too fast, you can't get to quality. And the lesson that I learned was, even though I came from the best intentions, sitting in a room telling teachers who've worked in years and years in a school and who've contributed their life, telling them that they don't have a job or they got to move, and I didn't even have good time to get to know them, was not the best way to go about it. And I got better because that stayed on my mind, and I got better at learning how to work with people in that experience. I hate to tell you that you learn a lot from failures. And anyone that tells you they had it perfect, I would tell you is lying to you. You have to learn, and you have to listen. And you have to learn the culture and how people function and how they do things, because it's about the community. It's not about you as the individual. And I would argue that lesson has helped me in all the other levels I've been in. I'm a much, much better and more seasoned now, I would say, at doing that. But, coming to Jacksonville or in the surrounding areas to Duval County for me is, one thing I will do is listen. Because the reality is, you have lived here. You know this community, or you've experienced things, right, wrong, or indifferent. And the reality, what makes this country beautiful and what makes this county good, is we have all walks of life, all races, all socioeconomics here. And those are the vibrant things about our city. But the reality is, you have to build a coalition around a lot of sets of issues by listening to people to know where they are in that experience to move that work. And one of the things that are hard about this job is that depending on the type of experience that person has had, that's what they're bringing to the table. John Dewey wrote a book called Education and Experience. And he said there's two types of folks. He says, would you rather somebody who had 10 years of bad experience, or would you rather have somebody who has 5 years of good experience? Who would you take in the job? And he gave the pros and cons of that in his argument. And he says the more people have good experiences and the more they learn from their failures, the better they are to engage and connect with the community and do the work. And so I bring that up to say that's how I think about this work. It's important to me that as I was pushing to doing all that, you gotta listen and help to move people forward, because moving people forward is a hard thing. And it's something that you can't take lightly. And you have to be respectful of people about what talents, what views they have, whether you agree with them or not, and how you can make them see where you're trying to go. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about things. I tell folks, you don't limit folks. An outcome is an outcome. Students reading is reading. We may have just multiple ways about going about that. But the reality is the outcome is if they can read and they get to the next level, we've achieved the goal as a community. And if the community feels and parents feel that their child are getting to that next level, we've been successful. So that's kind of been one of my lessons learned. I have much more if you want, but I don't know if I have time to do that.
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Safety Act, what would be your vision and strategy to address the short-term and long-term vulnerability risks?
It's not, it's actually with all districts. I think with urban context is even more complex because of so many different aspects you're coming from. One of the things I've learned is that you have to give student voice and create town halls. One thing we did in Nashville was we did a town hall with kids on the budget. We asked them, what would you spend on the budget? Kids told us, we listened to the adults, the teachers, and the principals, and all the different groups. But the kids, so like, if you just gave some more college counselors, so it was totally different from what we heard from other folks. But in the time that we're in, and the way that social media has played such a huge part, kids and communities get information at a very alarming rate and speed. And that has changed the dynamics on how schools function in America. And one of the things that we think about a lot, or the strategy that I always try to think about, is how do you create spaces for kids to give their voice as you're designing policy? And how do you do that with different other stakeholders to make sure that you can help address some of these big issues? Kids are coming with a lot of trauma to the table. And the reality is there's different types of point of view around these guns issues and those components. And you got to push on the legislature around those pieces. One of the things I will tell you, I don't believe teachers should have guns in schools. I know that people have different views of that. Teachers are having a hard time enough making sure they can reach and connect with all type of kids, and that's just not their part of their world. You don't want to give them that extra responsibility. And I think I don't think that you solve issues by thinking about more violent issues to do that. That can have a different effect than just from an administrative standpoint. But I do think that you have to provide safety and security. You have to be able to engage folks around what that looks like and make sure that parents, teachers, principals, everybody feels safe in that school environment. And you have to also know, I talked in the last room about there's social emotional learning. We have to be clear that in the environment that we're living in, right, wrong, or indifferent, people are coming from all walks of life. And because of poverty and because of all these other issues that goes on in the dynamics around trauma with families, that's spilling into children. Children are being raised a certain way, and that spills into schools. You want to know about certain communities? Just look at the school. Things spill into schools, and schools now have to become the hub on trying to work through that. But one thing I tell people all the time, when you look at the successful districts, communities are not a part of schools. Schools are a part of communities. And so you have to think in a different way on how you work through with that community to resolve that school issue. School districts don't always do that because that's cost effective, or sometimes that means too many stakeholders have an opinion, which I think it's okay. Having voices heard is a good thing, but being clear about what we stand for, how we go about it, the way that those messaging and those things happen is really important on how we move forward. And so that's how I kind of think about that work, giving student voice around that, on looking at particular policies on how to create a safe and learning environment, training people on how to deal with those issues, providing more social and emotional learning in schools. I think that there's this belief system that, a teacher walks in and they should be able to solve the world. They can't. They need to have social emotional teams of people with social workers and other type of folks to work to help problem solve so kids can perform more academically. I tell people there has to be some type of self-regulation, self-management. There's certain skills kids need to have to do that, and you have to be able to work. All the educators in that room have to have time and professional development to be able to do that work, to move that marker. So I hope I answered your question.
Hi.
Hello.
My question, excuse me, represents what teachers want to know about your style.
My style.
Your style. Some superintendents prefer teachers to follow provided lesson plans, curriculum guides, and timelines to ensure that all teachers across the county are on the same page.
Yeah.
Whereas other superintendents allow teachers to use the district-provided materials as a tool.
Yeah.
And allow more autonomy with lesson planning as long as all the lessons are guided by the standards. So in your current position, what is your personal philosophy and leadership style with regard to how the provided curriculum is used? Do you prefer district-led timelines and curriculum guides, or do you allow standards-based lessons with autonomy that allows teachers to use the provided curriculum only as a tool?
Great question. The folks in Nashville will be just excited how I respond to this too. Because I was a teacher, one thing I don't think is good is to not give teachers an autonomy to do work. I think teachers are skillful people. And I think we are in a time in education, unfortunately, where when there's issues or when performance does not happen, it's all the teacher's fault. And we don't think about whether we gave them enough planning time. Or we don't think about whether we created conditions for them to work in groups. And we don't, we come from a deficit model around how we think about autonomy for teachers. I do believe that in terms of curriculum, that we need to have high quality curriculum from a quality control perspective, that teachers should know what the standards are. I do think you should give them autonomy though, on how to get to that standard. And so that's kind of how I think. I don't think the scripted thing works. So I'm not a big fan of that. I think once you begin to do scripted, you take away other innovative things that they can do, right? So this whole notion that I'm going to force you to be a certain way to get higher performance does not work. It's also time consuming. So I tell folks, you get way more working with people on giving them, here's our marker, here's some pieces around that, here's some time, some professional development time to do it, and then push them to get there, and then that's the marker you move. I mean, as a teacher, I went to school, I have degrees, I work with these kids, I live with them every day. So now for you to tell me that it's gonna be this way, this way, this way, this way. No, I think what has to be clear is you have to be clear. The reason I would say that it's clear for the district to be clear about where the standards and the marker is because you have to have quality control to make sure that you're hitting that marker. But how you get there, I think teachers have to have autonomy. They have to be given time to do that. There also has to be time for professional development. The teachers that I've seen struggle the most, it's not because they're not good people. It's not because they didn't like the principal or they didn't, certain things. The challenge that they've had was they weren't allowed to learn how to do their craft better. And so I said the same thing in the other room. I have this thought in my mind that, we talk a lot about for teacher retention. Teachers leave managers. They don't leave because of salaries and all. They leave because of managers and conditions that are not set for them to be successful and professionally developed. There's a term we say, if you don't feed the teachers, they'll eat the students. If you don't feed the principal, they'll eat the teachers. And if you don't feed the central office folks, they'll eat the school. And the reality is you have to feed all of them so everybody can eat well at the table. But that part of feeding is creating designated time for professional development. And schools can't financially do that on their own. They have to work with teacher centers, work with universities, work with partners. And that's how you reduce people leaving the profession. When anybody leaves a job, it's because they feel that that person has not been supported and they're not engaged in the work, you know? So if people are leaving because they get opportunities, that's one thing. And we want that. I tell folks, you never want to stop people from moving forward, but we don't want them to leave us because they don't feel those pieces. So to answer your question, I believe in autonomy for curriculum. I believe that teachers should have time to do that work. I don't believe in scripted. I do believe even with schools that are struggling, I think you have to be clear about what those expectations are and help support them to reach that. I believe in planning time. I don't think teachers have enough time to plan. And that can look a lot of different ways. I think we're very traditional in our mindset around that. And a lot of these are also, I would say, were influenced by past reforms. If you would hear people would say in past districts, they would say, well, you know, you got to teach the kids. They have to have more time on task, more time and all that. Well, you got to help the teacher to be able to do that. You got to help the teacher support them to plan to differentiate. You have to do that. And you can only do that by giving them time, either time during the day, if you could be creative around that, or creating some type of mentorship for them to be in that fight. When I learned a lot of my work from each of my levels is because I was able to have time to think through professional development, think through what my strategies are at every level. From a teacher, from a principal, I got better and better at that. From a principal supervisor, I worked with supervision of teams around that. And even at this level as a superintendent, because I talked to a lot of superintendents, I learned through that process as well. And so I just think that that's the space I would come from. And that would be the space I would argue that I would be trying to move the district to.
Please describe your experience working with groups in an organization with varying interests and agendas. Describe how you were able to achieve consensus and a common vision for the organization with these different groups.
Yeah, well, that definitely doesn't happen in urban districts. Here's the reality. The reality is the superintendent job is challenging. You're going to be pulled. I would argue the superintendent and their cabinet team, because, you know, I always tell folks it's a team that moves the district. It's going to be challenging because you're going to have different groups that are going to pull you. And usually the folks who are the most influential or have the most resources and means usually are pulling at you just as much as the folks who feel like they don't have a lot. And you have to kind of balance that. I tell people the main thing is the main thing, and you move people towards the Duval County Public Schools plan. The reason why we have one plan, one strategic plan, there's clear markers of what we're trying to hit for the next 3 to 5 years, is because if you come to me to talk about anything, it's about moving the plan. And when we move the plan, it has to be public. We have to over-communicate it. People need to see themselves in it. And we have to engage the community about saying, here's what success looks and feels like. And so our experience right now in my position as I support the superintendent, and I'm also part of people talking to me as well, is we always guide them to what our plans are. And that plan is based on the strategic plan. Even our investments, even things that we're trying to do innovatively. If we're trying to do something innovative, we're doing it within the plan. And that's how you kind of move that part of the district. The beautiful thing is that you have a lot of collective groups trying to move the work with you. But you have to be able to move people towards the metrics that you want to get them to. And you have to also make sure that they're clear about when people interpret that we're successful, what does that feel like? What does that look like? And how do they know that we've invested and there's a return on investment on that? And so that's kind of how I think about that. You don't want there to be plans and people feel like, well, I don't know what the impact is. And so that's why you have to really be strategic on how you move those components. And there's a lot of moving pieces to that. I'm giving you very high level, but there's just layers of that you have to go through. And it's a 24/7 job doing that with a team, with an organization, and with the entire collective school system. And the 11,000 plus employees have to also be a part of helping us move that. I tell folks, I don't care if you're a custodian, you're the bus driver, you're whatever your position is, you got to know the plan like everybody else. And you got to see yourself in that plan to help move that work together. Districts that have done well have done, we call it the fancy word that we call, there's a lot of fancy words in education and business world. We call it collective impact. Things that have lasted over a period of time have had a collective impact to move the work. Things that have not, did not have a collective impact. And so you got to really kind of try out and move so everybody can feel like they know what their part is and they see themselves in the plan.
We have 5 questions in about 13 minutes.
Okay, my question is around public experience and working in the public. What has been the word we use is demanding public presence experience? What was your role?
Yeah.
What kind of role did the board play?
So when I think of, I want to make sure I'm going to clarify what you mean by public. So when I hear you say public, I mean I hear you say like appearances. Is that right?
I think when you said my job is to get beat up in the press and kind of be the face, I think that's what we mean.
Yeah. So I would argue that no matter what I do, I'll get beat up in the press. So my hope is that I tell people we need to over communicate. And the press is the press. They have to do their job. And I think they hold us accountable as they should. So I think it's important to be in the communities, all the communities. There's Rotary clubs. There's, remember I talked about a little bit about that every community has like their communication, their thing. And what we have to, and I'm sure the people here already know, the district folks who've been working here, it is really, that's why I'm going to listen a lot, is where are the folks that you got to go to with what groups to make sure that every part of the community feels like, or not feels, but knows that you're listening to help make impact on the next level of decisions, right? And so I feel that that's really important. And so one of the things is really being out in the community. You can't sit in the office, and look at the water and make decisions. Does not work. I don't know anybody who has been successful doing that. If you know, please give me their card. I look forward to calling them and telling them how they ran that magic in an urban district. But the reality is you have to be out. The job of the superintendent to get out in public is important, but I also argue that the job of all of our employees is just as important as much as they can to get out too. This job is not about the superintendent alone, it's about the community. So I'm a big believer that I work with the team around to get out to communities because I'm one person. There's no way I'd be able to get to all the schools I'll get to all the schools, but getting out to all the different events that happen. But I think what's important, I also do think that there always should be a member from the senior staff or something like that out in events, wherever they are. But I do think that people need to know that we support what's going on in the system and in the district, and they feel like we are part of the work and the process with them, and helping them accomplish whatever goal they need to accomplish. And those goals, from a strategic standpoint, our priorities, but different communities, they qualify certain successes in different ways. And that's kind of important to do that. So I gave the board just some articles about how I dealt with the press. I'm transparent, I'm honest. I'm never gonna say, everything's wonderful. I'll say, hey, we're thinking about things, we're working through. I think that when people talk about trust, what they're really talking about is whatever you say you're going to do, are you going to do it? Are you going to be honest? We're in a large urban district. We're one of the largest in Florida. And the reality is there are just going to be things that happen that we have to constantly manage. But what's important is that the families and communities know that we're always working on trying to problem solve the issue, and we're building on solving those issues together. Not all issues the school district can resolve. We have to kind of figure out how we work together to resolve them. So that's kind of how I think about that work. And I think that, the reality is another thing that's important in terms of the public is that we have to be really positive about our district. I don't know anybody who works for Apple or Google and says, they suck. I have never seen that. Have you? I mean, you hear about these companies people talk about on TV, and people You know, it's great to be here in this environment. If we're going to be the it place and we're going to be in the next generation, we want people to say Jacksonville has a great school system. When you go live there, this is how we do X, Y, and Z. And I tell folks the reality too that nobody talks about is depending on how the school community is, how that community is, and how people engage, they're always judgment of communities. You know, last night I was talking to my wife. I said, well, what do you think is the best place we'll live or in Jacksonville if I get the job, if we get the job, and what are we going to do? And, you know, so I was talking and listening to people just to see what they think about what community, right? I mean, we want people to live here. We want people to be a part of our system. And more importantly, we want it's economically vibrant for us because that helps to invest in our school system. And the more financial money we have, the more we can do more innovative things to do that work. And there are districts in the nation that are our size that are doing that. I think this whole notion around a deficit mindset that we're too large or we have too much complexities, we can't do that, that's not true. There's districts that are having the same set of issues, but they've overcome that. Doesn't mean they still don't have issues, but they problem solve to solve that issue together.
All right, Doctor. Give us an example where you have faced an authentic crisis. We heard a couple, but let's go. Within an organization. We need to know what happened, your role in handling it, the results, and most importantly, key things that you learned from that experience.
Yeah, so I gave you a few examples about some of that stuff. Let me give you an example from an organizational standpoint, because I think culture matters. All right, so I'll do that because, you know, when you work in my position, you're not only working to support to move the work, but you're also working with a lot of people in the system. We have 11,000 plus employees, and they've dedicated their lives to do education in this city, and they're going to have various sets of experiences. I think it's important for us to make sure that everybody feels in the organization that you design ways for them to communicate, collaborate, understand the vision of the system collectively. And one of the things that I did, that I've been a part of, not only just in Nashville, but also in Prince George's County, was we started to think about, we started to talk about, look at data on why that performance and services to schools didn't happen at a high level, and why sometimes people had a very bad approach to schooling. And so we talked about, like, what if you created central office retreat and training where the people who are going out to the schools and working with principals can work together to problem solve, just like how teachers should be doing that with planning and just how principals should be doing that with each other. And so one of the things we designed was we did retreats where we would have, whether you're from the transportation office, sitting with the academic person, and whether you're the academic person sitting, and we would meet to talk through about, here's our year's goals. And here's how we move it, so they can problem solve on how to make the world easier for schools, because central offices can cause chaos. I tell folks all the time, I told the board member yesterday when we were sitting, I said, if me and you are not on the same page, we can cause so much chaos because people are gonna watch how we react, what we move, how we do, right? That terminology, that context is not different in organizations, it's not different in schools, it's the same concept. So what I've had to do a lot of times, sometimes in my position, I usually get stuff when things are not going well. And so I have to sit with the team to try to problem solve, how do we help to kind of organize that? So an example on our end is really organizing our central office in a way to help support schools better around their vision, to help teachers and principals have more time to do things, and also give them, work with them on strategies to figure out how they can get feedback to be able to provide support in a more efficient way. And just like how I'm a big proponent to teachers needing more time to do their job, I'm a big proponent that efficiencies happen when people can work and problem solve together at the central office level.
My question is related to staff. How do you establish a team and mobilize team members to achieve goals? Give an example of a successful project resulting from teamwork.
Yeah, so I probably have the most direct reports in Nashville in the senior leadership team. I think about almost 8, and I have a bunch of divisions underneath that. And so one of the things that I do constantly is I meet with them all the time, and We do certain strategies on trying to help them problem solve. So, we have a thing we call "What's your biggest headache?" Getting them to kind of problem solve and figure out how to help collaborate and move the work. I really believe that you got to take a lot of time to do that. And then I'm a strong believer in professional development for people. I tell folks, I don't care what your level is, there has to be professional development so people can get better. And more importantly, you have to work with them on what they need to get better at by listening and engaging them. So a part of my work when I work with the divisions is to kind of get them to problem solve around their targets. And how do you move people to do that work? The reality is, as you go up in a school system, you're dealing more with people than you are with kids. And one of the things I always tell folks is you have to really think about the levels when you work. So I'll give you an example. I tell my staff that your job is to professionally develop the people that are reporting to you. So everything you do is designed to work with them to help impact kids, because you don't teach kids directly, right? I tell a principal supervisor, your job is to support the principals to help. They are your learners. I tell a principal supervisor, your principals are your learners. I tell the principals, your learners are the teachers, and the teachers' learners are the kids. So everything you do around that work is to design to help support them, but professionally develop them to get to the target they need to get to. Most time when people are having challenges, it's not because they don't want the right thing to happen, it's that they don't know the how, or they didn't have time to think through that work. And our context, or my philosophy, is you have to create that to happen. Everything happens by design. I tell you, in our world, the reason we make certain decisions, everything happened by design. There's a design that happens why people have and have not in America. There's a design why there's poverty in some areas and there's success in other areas. And there's a design that happens sometimes around inequities. And the reality for us is we got to work with communities to close those gaps, because there are flaws in our educational system and on how we function sometimes as communities. And so you have to do things by design. And so to answer that question around those components, I really work on trying to work and develop them to help kind of trickle down that effect as we move them towards our target to help improve students.
Okay, I have the next question. We have high and low socioeconomic students. How would you ensure that every student, regardless of socioeconomic status, receives equal access and resources to ensure high achievement? Please give examples of use of facilities, curriculum design, and community input to achieve equal access.
Yeah, so the reality around equal, so first, as I stated in my last response, inequities happen in a lot of different ways. And they happen, not that it's people's fault, but it's a have and have not system. There's a lot of different things that happen. One of the things when it comes to low socioeconomic students is that you have to be realistic, or the brutal fact is you have to do more. And doing more can mean a lot of different things, but funding is a marker of doing more. I tell folks that's a reality. And the reality is low socioeconomic impacts high socioeconomic. We are one community, and I tell folks all the time, if you can say to yourself, well, they don't have, well, if they don't have, they don't do well, whatever that they is, you get more poverty, more violence, and your city of Jackson, our city, and our county does not do well. So we all have a collective responsibility towards each other around that. So we have to think about resources in a different way. So when I think about the low socioeconomic component, I think about how you align your resources to those particular schools, or to help kind of close the gap around making sure that they get high quality service. On the other end, you can't worry just about low and not worry about high, right? And so you have to also make sure that you're creating experiences for other communities. And it may not be that you give more money, but it may be different type of experiences so they can feel that there's acceleration happening in their world as well. I mean, one of the challenges I'll give you an example. I tell people, think about going into a house and you walk into that house. Our job is, doesn't matter what floor you get into in the house, Our job is to tear the roof off and raise the floor. And as you raise the floor, you're clear about what that success looks like, so you can kind of close those inequality gaps. So in my view of the world, when it comes to access to high quality curriculum, you make sure that happens for all schools, no matter where you fall in the category. You also make sure that providing additional funding or resources to provide additional gaps to close, whether that's with intervention or more people. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to think about that. And then the other component is being clear about the type of experiences that you want children to have in the system, no matter where you are in the school system. And that's how you work on that. I think you said facilities, did I hear you say that as well? So when I think about facilities, I think about, we will become more creative as a school system if we're designing classrooms on how kids learn. I think classrooms are very traditional. They put you in front of, the teacher stands in the front, and they get the desk in line, and, when you think about the most high-performing school districts, I've been to a lot of school districts, and I saw that the most highest-performing school districts have, they create, space for kids to walk and talk and problem solve. I mean, when I tell you about design how America is by design, an environment impacts how you think. An environment impacts how you go about doing the work. An environment impacts how you feel every day, right? And so you have to kind of think about those pieces as you're organizing that work. So when you think about an example in Nashville, we have classrooms where kids are learning to be ambulance. They're doing the ambulance piece and working with the fire workers, and we have classrooms that look like that, so the kids can have on-hand experience. Or we have one school that's a school that's done remarkable work of turnaround, where kids want to be producers for music, and we actually have a studio in there, right? But that's, it's the choice. And matter of fact, that particular school, and you want to talk about the Stoneman and Douglas, we had kids that went to the Charlottesville and performed with the kids from there when they had that incident that happened, and also created music that they recognized, I think, through VH1 around, when the incident happened, about how to bridge and work together. But the point I'm making is creating classrooms where design can happen. But when you do that, you also have to work with teachers on a different way around how do you help support them to help kids get that. So that's when I think about facilities. When I think about curriculum design, was the other one you talked about. Curriculum design, I think high quality curriculum is high quality curriculum, and you got to work through with teachers around the standards for that. And then you work with folks on different ways and giving them support on how to get there. And that helps schools a lot. I have, in all my experiences in Nashville, I've been able to work right now, the priority schools report to me. And we have 2 schools that are projected to, 2 to 3, we'll wait till the new marker comes out, that are going to projected to get out. If you ask me what did they do that was different, was that they worked with teachers and giving them autonomy on how to work and problem solve to teach kids in different ways. And those schools don't necessarily have the facilities, but they do have they've set up the culture in the school in such a way that families and parents feel welcome. They feel like they're connected to the school, and that's a design piece. But I would assume, just like most urban districts, unless we're just perfect here, that we probably have a backlog on a lot of facility issues that we probably would have to solve over a period of time. I would say that over the period of time, that we just need to think about different ways with our architects that we cost effective, of course, on how to design classrooms in a way where learning can happen at a high level. Our team I've worked with different folks in the different districts in each of those areas, and that's been kind of how they kind of think about it. But to go back again to your point from a facility standpoint, if you look at some of the most high performing organizations, they've been able to create that type of environment and space. I think you had one more. No? You said curriculum, facilities, and then community input. Yeah. So if you haven't gotten anything else that I said today, communities are important. Communities matter. Schools are a part of communities, and it's not communities are a part of schools. And so you have to create constant space for that dialogue and feedback. I tell principals, when you create your budget, you have to make sure that the community with you around that, whether you're working with your PTO or PTA, whatever your organization is, and you also make sure that your community-based organizations are a part of that. You have to constantly listen so you can make adjustments and do those things. And I think of that as any process. One of the things I'll be hopeful for, or that I'll do, not even hope, if I'm chosen as your superintendent, is model what feedback looks like. I will tell you now, if I come into this district, the first thing I will do is listen into a lot of communities and go out with board members to go sit in communities to hear what their hopes and dreams are for Duval County Public Schools. So we can kind of create a path together to move the work forward. And that's something I believe is strong. I think it's important. And if we're able to do that, we can be able to prioritize where we want to be in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Doctor. Is there anything else you would like to share with us to support your candidacy?
Yeah, so will I have time to ask you a question or no?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, we're over.
So if I had time to ask you a question, I would have said, what do you, as a focus group, what is it that you want to see? If I was your superintendent for the next 10, 12 years, whatever that time would be, what is it that you would say, you know that seat on Narcisse, we made the right choice when he was superintendent, and here's the 3 things that we saw that he did, and man, thank goodness we made that choice. That would have been my question to you. But let me tell you, let me close by saying this. You have an important recommendation to make. Fact. And the reality is, do not take it lightly. I have been a part of a lot of school systems, and the advantage I tell folks is I've seen good things and I've seen bad things happen for a lot of reasons, for choices. And I've seen where community's been involved and not involved. And I will tell you that whoever you decide to be in this seat needs to be transparent, needs to make sure that no matter what community you're in Duval, they can connect with, needs to make sure that you can put trust in them, needs to make sure that there's always honesty, needs to make sure that people feel that they're a constant learner, needs to make sure that people feel that, you know something, they listen and they give feedback and they move the work together. If those are some of the big factors that you're looking for, and that you believe that community involvement in all those pieces, I'm your guy. I'm your guy. And that would be the big piece. So I just want to make sure that you understand that. I tell folks all the time, this is not just about whether somebody can work with teachers, work with principals, work with schools. It's whether somebody can work with the community to make Jacksonville or Duval County one of the best places to be in the nation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Narcisse.